Here we go.
All right, it is Monday, April 5th. This is Senate Government Operations. It would be my dad's birthday today. If he wasn't
It
dead,
still is
so
his
happy
birthday.
birthday, Dad.
It's happy birthday.
He would be 114. Is that what I said this morning? 114.
Wow. It still is his birthday. It's always his birthday.
Anyway, we are looking at five seven two. And it's the teachers. And so I don't think we have any amendments for it. I don't think we've gotten very far on it.
We haven't discussed it, have we?
Yes, we have. I have notes all over it.
I did too. The treasurer was in.
There are huge issues with it. And some of the questions that were raised were, somebody said you can't be working full-time and collect Medicare, but I think that was wrong, because you can. So what's the policing mechanism for bona fide retirement? Will it, if we don't have any time on there that they have to be retired, will it encourage people to, will it change behavior by encouraging people to retire early so that they can get their retirement and then also have a salary? When can they sign it? 6 months, they have in here 6 months. Where will the health care come from? Who's going to be responsible for providing their health care? And this thing about a separate, separately computed for a period of time and bona fide retirement. I already said that, right? So I think I thought I saw Jeff Francis on there. You didn't testify last week, so Jeff, would you like to join us and weigh in on this?
Yes.
I don't know if you're still there. Oh, there you are.
No, I sure will. Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Francis. I'm the Executive Director for the Vermont Superintendents Association. And thank you for inviting me today. I want to make sure that my audio is working okay. If it's not, I'll mute my camera. How is it coming through for you?
It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I just got a note from Jay Nichols that he needs to leave on short notice. So what if I just make 1 minute's worth of comments? Then Jay, who's done the lion's share work for the associations on this, could comment, Madam Chair, if you'll allow that.
Sure.
And then you can come back to me. So as I said, I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association. We support this bill. I understand some of the challenges that were articulated in the introduction this afternoon. Our hope would be that we can work together to make sure that those concerns are resolved, because this bill is really what I would refer to as a post-COVID necessity. An example that I'll cite is in Vermont, we have 54 superintendents right now. We know that as of July 1, 2022, at least 15 of those superintendents will turn over. I think it's higher than that. So districts are looking for immediate relief with regard to positions within the education delivery system that they are not able to fill, given applicants that emerge just as sort of a normal course of action. So our interest in supporting this bill is to make sure that we can continue with the delivery system for public education, filling necessary positions and rely on the ranks of retirees if possible. And it's a bill that I think, like other post-COVID legislation, is intended to respond to emerging needs. I know that Jay has reported to me that in the work that he's done with legislative counsel, with the House and with the treasurer, that every effort's been made to address the problems that were cited. And my encouragement would be, if those issues are not fully addressed, that we do what we can to address them so that we can put this bill into place. So with that, if you don't object, I'll stand down, let Jay make whatever comments he would make. And then if you want to come back to me, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Jeff. I would just ask one question. Is a superintendent considered a school educator?
Yes.
Okay.
So within the ranks, and the reason that I cited superintendents is because that's a position that I'm familiar with, particularly with regard to the vacancies and turnover. But the problem right now in schools from a staffing standpoint is top to bottom in terms of the folks that are working in our schools. So the effort would be to, again, utilize retirees that are willing to come out of retirement. And, you know, I think many will not be, but some would, and to get them supporting the education delivery system in what I refer to, I guess, as active duty. And that's the intent of the bill. So, and Jay has details on how he thinks this bill would work. So I'll defer to him with your permission.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Jay, do you want to answer some of the questions that came up last time?
Well, I've got like 4 minutes. So I thought this testimony was tomorrow, and I get screwed up on my days, and I've got a meeting at 1:30, ironically enough, with a superintendent and a HR person and a principal who can't find any staffing. And it's in one of our wealthier districts. So I think that a lot of the things that the treasurer brought up and others shared, Rebecca Wasserman did address. And I think that anything that needs to be addressed, you know, we should work on it together with the treasurer and with this committee to make any changes that are necessary. I do think some of the, I don't want to use the word doomsday, but some of the fear things around the pension may not necessarily be accurate. I've talked to Vermont NEA. I don't see a whole bunch of teachers come out of retirement seeing this as a golden goose. As I said the other day, typically a teacher teaches in the same school for a long period of time. And for them to retire, walk away for 6 months, which now puts them in January. The only way they'd be coming back would be in the middle of a year. Schools don't hire teachers in the middle of the year very often. So this is going to be a circumstance when a school is really in a bind. And we can make sure that there's rules in place that don't allow teachers to overuse this. It's really about filling positions and having qualified people. And it's about helping kids out, because right now we're in situations where we've got people off the street that are substituting in a lot of our schools and doing big chunks of time, you know, 2-3 months at a time, teaching our kids. And we've got a whole bunch of kids that are missing good 3rd grade instruction or good 5th grade instruction or good mathematics instruction. And we could mitigate a lot of that if we put in place this bill. And again, whatever safeguards we need to do to protect the pension, I'm all for. I know Treasurer Pierce knows I do not want to do anything that's going to hurt the pension. I definitely want that to be strong. And I'm hoping that this will bring a little bit of money into the pension. And that was kind of part of my thinking at the very beginning. And the last thing I'll say, I got a call from from a superintendent 2 hours ago, who said to me, do you have anybody that can fill in for my assistant principal who's going on a medical leave? I'd like to be able to use somebody. And I listed 3 names of people in the area that I thought would be pretty good, who are all retired. And she said, well, none of them are going to do it because they wouldn't make enough money. They'd have to come out of their retirement to do it. And they're not going to do that. They're not going to trade a dollar for a dollar. When people retire, they're not usually retiring looking to make more money somewhere else. So there has to be some incentive if we're going to actually ask qualified people to work with our kids. And right now, I'm afraid we're asking unqualified people to work with our kids because there are no qualified people. And lastly, I'm doing 3 principal searches right now. I do that through my side consulting work. It's not good. There are not dozens of people applying to be principals, even in our highest paying positions. And it's even worse in the teacher fields. There are schools that are getting 0 candidates for classroom teaching jobs. And if we don't do something, you know, in the end, we're just ultimately going to hurt our kids. So again, I would work with the treasurer or anybody else. I have a ton of confidence in Rebecca Wasserman. She made a lot of changes to the first drafts of the bill. And I think that any concerns that we have can be worked out. I apologize for not being able to stay with you. And if I can come back, I will.
Thank you. I was hoping we would have it worked out so that we could pass it today, but I guess that would happen. So I have 6 questions here, and I think that what we need to do is we need to get the list of questions and concerns instead of talking around and talking what the problem is and what the issues are. I mean, we need to list what our concerns are with this bill, because we know it's a problem. We know it was a problem before COVID. We know it's, and I'll tell you, I do know it's a problem. I worked with 3 teachers all summer long on the pension bill. So I'm well aware of it, as I'm sure the other committee members are too. So here's what I have for the list of questions that I think we raised last time that we need to address. How is it going to impact the pension fund? Are they going to pay into the pension fund during that time? Are they going to get extra added to their pension once they're done with this extra teaching? Like, will it will this year count toward their additional pension benefits? Are we going to do they have to be retired 6 months, a year, 2 years? How long? Is there going to be a sunset on this? Because I don't think we should allow this to go on forever.
We talked some pilot, we sort of talked about sunset or pilot.
Well, sunset, yes. And it was raised that they shouldn't be able to come back in the same school, which kind of defeats the purpose of, but I think that was something that Mr. Nichols brought up. Who's going to pay for their health care, and how many times can they do this? Can they keep doing this forever and ever until they're 85 years old and just keep coming back and teaching? Are we going to put a limit on the number of times they can do this? So I think, did other people have other questions that were raised by? Yes.
So I think our sunset takes care of my pilot question. The number of years, I think you take it with one of your questions, which is, for me, there's an additional question is how long do we need to have them be retired for? But the other one is 1 year enough in a school? Or I mean, for example, a superintendent, I don't see them going off and doing other jobs in that school. If that's what the school needs until they can find a full-time superintendent, why should it be limited if the teacher is willing to continue? Because right now, I believe the bill has it limited for 1 year at a time in that position.
Yes.
So I would just ask that question is why limit it if it's working
because
well and they can't still find a replacement? So
okay, it might be easier to just keep having that person on than to actually spend a lot of time looking for a replacement. I think that we need to put some limit on it, because I don't think you want somebody coming back for the next 10 years.
Right, but if you can't find, if the problem is because, anyway, that's my question.
Okay.
Is the time frame.
Okay, anybody else did have different questions?
No, you covered mine exactly.
I got the same thing.
Okay, so I guess, Beth, you're the best person to weigh in on the impact on the pension fund. Are they going to be paying into the pension fund? Are they going to be getting additional benefits once they're done with this 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or however long it is that they're in that position? I think you're the most appropriate person to answer that.
Sure. So a couple of points to that. The impact on the pension fund, again, what we've seen in the fiscal notes of other states is it will have an impact. I'm going to try to take this off.
Thank you, because I could not understand a word you said.
Yeah, okay. So the impact on the pension fund, we expect, based on our conversations with our actuaries and based on looking at the fiscal impact statements of other states, would be to increase liabilities. I would point out that particularly if you were to have people work more than 1 year, getting to the points that were just made, Senator, that why just 1 year and keep having the person on? I think that would be a major problem in terms of an additional benefit. If in fact they're on for more than a year, you start to get into what happens when they reach 5 years, and that's technically the vesting period of time. And do they end up with another pension on top of that if they reach the 5-year vesting period? With respect to contributions, we brought this up at the last time we spoke about this. There is a piece in there that said that contributions would have to be made by the employee. It's silent on whether or not they're returned. My presumption was that perhaps they're thinking that that will help with the system. I have a hard time believing there wouldn't be a challenge. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm having a hard time believing there wouldn't be a challenge if someone said, hey, I left and I want my money back, given the current structure of our pensions systems. Right now, if somebody leaves, they're entitled to their and they're not vested, they're entitled to their contributions plus interest. I don't know if that answers your questions.
It does, and the follow-up question I would have, unless other people have a question first, the follow-up question I would have then is, could a school hire somebody just on a contract? I mean, like as a consultant, so they weren't considered part of the school staff, which would then, they wouldn't be paying into the benefit and they wouldn't be receiving any additional benefits. They would just be hired as a
Independent contractor.
an independent contractor. Would that work?
I think there's some concerns about that across the state in terms of hiring back employees as independent contractors. I'm not prepared to answer that question today. I did want to follow up on the other piece of this, which is that right now, if you're hiring people, and I heard the comment that not too many people would come out of retirement. My concern is prospective, the number of people that will make retirement decisions about retiring earlier than if they had if they knew that this benefit existed. They might retire a year earlier or 2 years earlier, and then recognizing that they could come back. And Senator, I know that that folks are saying, no, that couldn't happen. Every single fiscal impact statement that I looked at brought up the same question, as did our actuaries. So I don't think that this is something you can just shrug off. I think that you need to recognize that that's where the cost would come. I would also say that you're shifting the cost to the retirement plan. And again, you've worked very hard to take a look at ways to lower the unfunded liabilities. There are, if there are vacancies, there's budgets within the schools that might be an option. I don't know whether COVID dollars would be available for these. I think that would be a question, Madam Chair, that you might want answered, whether or not this could be better filled by using current COVID dollars for at least this crisis. But what it does is it lowers it puts the burden of these vacancies not on the local budgets, but on the pension fund. And I am concerned about that. The average teacher makes, the average teacher of the most recent retirement, so I want to be clear, it's people that retired over the last year, is roughly $26,000. And you're now adding for every single person back a cost of $26,000 for at least a year. Getting to your point, Madam Chair, about other, whether you can come back and do it again and come back, and if you can do it 5 years. Think about that. Other states have suggested that as many as 1/4 of the retirees, 25% of recent retirees might take this up. So let's say that's true. That would be 100 people in our situation. That's $2.6 million that first year and continuing on. Now, I don't think it would necessarily be that high. That's the only one where I saw an estimate. But it does change behavior. If you remember the retirement incentive, when we incentivize employees to leave to address short-term operational budgets, the reality is that over 300 applied and over 200 and some odd took that benefit. So you are changing behaviors. And if if I'm looking at my retirement, I said I've got 2 years to go, but if I leave in one, not only will I get my retirement, I'll get my full pay as well. I think I might take that option. I think that's good economics if I'm a teacher contemplating retirement and I'm near the end of my career.
Yeah, thank you. And we talked a lot about influencing behavior and not being able to predict it when we did the pension.
Right.
Allison?
So I think, Beth, a lot of those concerns could be taken care of with when we come to a decision about how long people need to be retired before they could do this. And there's one. The other thing, and the other thing would be how often they could repeat. I mean, if it's just limited to 1 year, I don't think people are going to exactly be, changing retirement behaviors over 1 year or up to 3 years even. And I think, I don't know how creative we got about what income they could receive if they take advantage of this opportunity, because I actually think this is a great opportunity, and I think we need to figure out how to make it work. Did they talk about in the House taking only half of their retirement income? If they're paying in additionally, if they're paying for healthcare, or I think that there's a package we could come to where the pension fund is losing nothing, and we can figure out how to cover some of these costs. So I don't know how creative. What were some of the options that they looked at in the House that would be creatively not have an impact on the pension fund?
Well, clearly this is what they came up with, so.
But were other things discussed that didn't make it in the bill?
I don't think that's.
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask either Jeff or Colin if they know the answer to this. Or maybe Sue, I'm not sure who. Could a school hire somebody, whether they were a retired teacher or not, under a contract so that they're not considered part of the school faculty or the school, what do I want to say, the body of the school, and therefore they wouldn't be paying when I have my summer jobs. Sometimes I'm hired as an employee and sometimes I'm hired as an independent contractor. So I'm responsible for my FICA. I don't get any holidays. I don't get any of that. It's just, I get paid by the hour. Could a school do it that way? And that would then have no impact on the pension fund whatsoever, either going in or coming out. I don't know if that can happen. It's the three of you will have to tell us.
So,
yeah, Senator White, I'd be happy to take a first crack, and I'm sure Jeff and Sue will be able to supplement what I say. So two things. One is, teachers are unionized for the most part, and actually I think universally in public schools in Vermont. And it's very clear that the positions that exist in that bargaining unit. So a third grade teacher is going to be part of that collective bargaining unit. And if a school district were to contract with somebody to provide instruction of a third grade outside of that contract, that would not be permissible under the collective bargaining agreement. The other thing I would just flag as a general matter, and this goes perhaps a bit beyond the scope of my knowledge, but I do believe that as a general matter, if one is designated as an independent contractor, they can't be receiving sort of very prescriptive instructions on how to do that work by their employer for, say, an entire year. So I think there are sort of two barriers to the construct that, or the question you're asking there. And Jeff and Sue may have additional comments.
So I would just want to throw in a second part, but subs are hired sometimes, as Jay said, 3 or 4 months you're working as a sub. That is some kind of a contract that you have with the sub, but they don't belong to the union and they don't get any benefits?
I would say it depends on the local collective bargaining agreement. So especially once you get into long-term subs, that's so when you're talking multiple months of a substitute versus a day-to-day situation.
Okay. Anthony, did you have a question first?
I had the same question. I was asking how subs fit into this.
Okay. So Jeff or Sue, can you weigh in on that particular question?
Hi, Jeff Francis, Superintendent Association. I can't respond to the question about subs, but I think I know the answer to the question about bringing folks back as independent contractors. And the IRS has a test that differentiates between employee and independent contractors. And there was a period of time, maybe 15 or 17 years ago, when several superintendents did exactly what I think the question anticipates, which is they retired and they opened consulting businesses and then started to work again in various education settings as consultants. And that got shut down pretty quickly because they could not meet the test as an independent contractor, which goes to how you get your supervision, what your workplace is, and so on and so forth. So it was actually the treasurer at the time. It might have been Jeb Spalding, who I worked with. And, it very, very quickly became clear that that was not going to be permitted because it was an innocent effort on their part, but their effort was to continue to work and also collect their retirement without the benefit of any authorizing ability to do it. So I believe, and I could stand corrected on this, but I think I'm correct, is that the option does not exist to come back as an independent contractor. And I would say thus the importance of this bill, if we can see this bill through.
Well, I guess that answers that question. Sue, did you have anything more to add?
No, I think they covered it well. Thank you.
And Jeff, I do remember some of those superintendents that did that. Okay, so I guess that answers that question. They couldn't come back.
Yeah, not an option, sadly.
So I guess I think that the question of if they're paying into the benefit, into the pension fund, and they don't get any return, they can ask for their money back before they're vested. So if they do it, this is the way I understand it, Beth. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'm hired and I'm paying into the benefit plan, but I'm not receiving any extra benefit when I leave. So I leave after 4 years. I ask for my money back. Is that right, Beth?
Yeah, you get that plus interest.
Yeah, I get that plus interest. And so if somebody can come back and work for 5 years, then and the state has put in their share of the money for that person. And that goes in. So the state is on the hook, or the school board, whoever.
Yeah.
Okay. Colin, did you?
Yeah, this was just an idea that came to me when I was listening to the treasurer's comments on this. That right obviously exists for somebody who's in the system, the 5 years they can get their contributions. As part of this construct here that's being discussed, perhaps it would be it wouldn't be allowed for somebody who's returning in this type of construct to get those contributions back. That in theory could be written into 572. I guess that's sort of a question I'm posing generally to whoever might be the best person to answer that.
Well, I think Beth did say that might invite some litigation by people who said they've paid in. I think Tim might have an answer there.
Thank you.
Respectfully, Tim Duggan, Director of the Retirement Systems in the Treasurer's Office. Thank you. I don't have an answer today, but I have a concern on that point, and I would want an opinion of tax counsel on that question. I am not aware of circumstances where a member's contribution is allowed to be sort of swept up by the state. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I'm not aware of it. And I would want to make sure that were that to be written in, that was evaluated by counsel.
Can we write in here that they don't pay into the pension fund? They don't pay in and they don't have any, they don't receive anything in return. I mean, can that be, can we write that in here, Tim?
May I address that, Madam Chair? This is Beth Pierce.
Yeah.
When this was written and reviewed by joint fiscal, I think the answer was that that these contributions would offset the cost. Number one, they're not sufficient to offset the cost, but the idea was that they would remain in the fund. I don't think, getting to Tim's point, I think that you could open yourself up to litigation. I'm not a lawyer. I think your point, Madam Chair, was to that. But the idea that they had was that that those dollars would help mitigate the cost of this. And if you give it back, you're not mitigating the cost. And if you don't collect it at all, you're not mitigating the cost.
One other potential thought on this, and Tim and Beth, thanks for those. And obviously, I'm sort of throwing out some ideas here. So here's another one for you is, what if, and I'm looking at Jeff and Sue as I say this, what if the school district were the one responsible for paying that contribution, the equivalent of the contribution from the employee? So therefore, it's not a contribution paid by this employee, but it's actually paid for by the employer for this specific narrow window that is being contemplated in this bill.
If you want me to respond to that, I think that you would also, if you were looking at that, I think they should pick up the state costs too, but keep in mind that the state would be putting in for these for this system as well. So I think that would be a fairly, between the two, it might be something that I don't know how the school districts would react to that. So I'd be interested in that. Administratively, I don't know how that works. And, we have, as I said earlier in testimony, when we did the Pension 101, is that I've worked in New York, I've worked in Connecticut, I've worked in Massachusetts, and all with larger systems than we have here. And I've never seen a more complicated system than I do in Vermont. We have more carve-outs and more specialty things, and everybody but this. And frankly, it makes it harder and harder to administer. And you're going to have errors at some point in time with a small staff. You're going to be at a point where you're going to have errors. I think that this might complicate the process. And I'm going to stop talking. If you wouldn't mind, let Tim Duggan, who knows a lot more about retirement than I do.
But before you weigh in, can I just follow up on Colin's suggestion there? If you have the district paying whatever the salary was, because that's what they would be doing, and you had the district paying for both the employer and employee contribution to the pension fund, then the person has no right to ask for that. They haven't made any contributions, and the district would cover both the employer and employee contributions. So if that ended up being, I don't know, $2,000, the district would have to be responsible for that. Does that work, Tim?
I hadn't thought about that, so I need to kind of issue spot that. But what occurs to me is it kind of begs the question, if the district is going to pay for this, the incentive piece of this, I'm not sure why the pension system is involved at that point. That's to say, if the district is paying for the salary of the position and additionally is paying an extra amount, it would seem that, I guess I wonder why the pension system is involved at all, that the status quo could hold where the individual is no longer in the system. The district's making whatever its incentive payment is to retain the individual. And so I'm struggling to see the place for the pension system in that construct.
Yeah, I think that was my question, was if the district was covering the salary and the employee and employer contributions, the state is just paying out the regular pension that they would be paying anyway, whether the person gets a job back in the school or gets a job at Walmart or just doesn't get any other job, they'd be paying the same amount. So if the district were covering everything, well, maybe, or I don't know why they would even have to pay into the pension. They, but that I guess maybe is a union issue.
But if they did, it would also put additional pressure, financial pressure on the district to come up with the money, which might impact property taxes at some point.
Well, they're gonna have to make that decision.
I'm just saying, nothing's free, so
right.
if you've taken it off the shoulders of the teacher, somebody's gonna have to pay for it.
Right,
Exactly.
so if the job normally pays $50,000 a year, and it's $2,000 into the pension system for both the employer and the employee. I have no idea that that's right. I know it isn't right at all, but so the school district says we'll pay you $48,000 instead of the $50,000.
Okay.
And then we'll pay the. I don't know. I think that, Tim, that's something that you and Beth should think about and see if that is something that could work. And then it's up to the district. If they really can't find people and they want to have people, then somebody's going to pay for it. Yeah, you're right. Allison, did you have a question?
I just need to be, well, it's going to sound too ignorant to ask this question, so I think I'll wait for a break and ask it, because this construct is designed around a person getting a full, coming back after X period of time away, 2 or 3 years, come back, full salary,
Mm-hmm.
and full benefit, or are they taking a sabbatical from the full benefit and just getting health care? Because it strikes.
No, they're getting
Full benefit of retirement benefit. This is the incentive, right? Is that they get this
if they're the average pension is 26, so they get their $26,000
plus the 52
plus whatever the salary is, right? Yes,
right.
That's the incentive.
Right, that's the incentive to come and do it. And the question is, how do we not? So it's incentive enough to, well, I'll regroup my thought, because I had a thought.
But I would like to hear an answer to that, as if they could either not pay into the pension plan at all while they're on this special status, and therefore the pension plan wouldn't be impacted at all because they wouldn't be paying in and they wouldn't be getting any more as a result of their salary that they're getting now. Or if the school district could pay for both, and therefore there would be an infusion into the system, but there shouldn't be any increased benefit. So those are
So where I was going was thinking that maybe we look at a construct where if they go back under this special status, they get a full salary, they get half of their pension. The other half of the pension goes to, ensure there is no other loss, and they get health care. I mean, we haven't talked about the additional piece of health care.
No, we haven't talked about that, but they can almost do that right now. They could go back and work for half a year and get their full salary, their full pension. They can do that right now. They can go back and work for half a year and get their full pension.
And their health care.
Yep.
Yeah, whatever the
package is.
Their retirement benefits are, and would get it. And they can work for half a year.
Yes.
Half a school year. And how many currently take advantage of that? Or help schools?
Or 60% receive, actually.
I
How
don't
many
have,
people do that now roughly a year?
I don't have that data. I can ask around.
Well, that would give us a good indication of what the uptick is, of what the take-up is gonna be on this, wouldn't it?
If I could, Madam Chair, a
Yeah.
couple of points on this. Someone said nothing is free, and that's absolutely the case. And again, this is putting the burden on the pension system. I have to, if you have, and again, I'm not trying to be cognizant of property tax, but if you have significant vacancies, my presumption is that you're not spending all of your payroll budget. And perhaps you could use that. You could use money that at the local level to pay for an incentive. I think that keeping a teacher there through an incentive, so they get a cash payment, for instance, to stay. We think that that would have a much better value in terms of addressing those needs. Keep those teachers that are still working and send them to stay and incent them to stay longer, I think makes more sense. Getting to your point, Senator, the issue of you can make up to $39,000 per year now, which is the average, that's a current 60% of the average teacher's salary. Tim, if I mess this up, let me know. And continue to keep your retirement. So there is an incentive right now. How many use it? I don't know. We'd have to take a look at it. My concern here is if I'm making a retirement choice and I can leave a year earlier and still get my retirement and get paid, I'm going to do it. I mean, well, I don't have that option, and I would not for a minute think that I would be a very good teacher. I'm terrible at that, and I have a ton of respect for the people that do it. But taking a look at the operating budgets, providing a cash incentive, which is what we recommended in our initial letter, as opposed to putting the burden on the retirement system, they can still get up to $39,000 a year in payment as an employee and still be a member of the retirement system. I think that would be, in my mind, a better construct than what we're seeing here.
If I can, just from my understanding of what's happening in the schools, it isn't getting people to stay there. It's getting people to come fill positions that are sitting there empty. So if you have a third grade teacher that, and you want to get them to stay, you might offer them an increase in their salary to get them to stay. But if you don't have a third grade teacher at all, there's nobody to entice to stay. There's no incentive can get somebody to stay that isn't there in the first place. So it's trying to fill unfilled as opposed to getting people to stay instead of retire. And I think that that's the issue here is all of those unfilled positions and how do we get them back?
That's a bigger question because that's a recruitment.
Well,
issue
it is
for
a bigger
teachers.
question, but that is exactly what this is trying to do. So we can't answer.
As a short-term gap. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
short-term fix.
we can't answer how they are going to recruit more teachers. We can't. That's not our problem.
Madam Chair?
Yeah,
The reason that you have vacancies is because you can't fill them and teachers have retired over time and they're leaving the workforce earlier. Our pension data shows that that is responsible for, as I said, almost 50% teacher turnover and retirements earlier than expected, are about 50% of the increase in unfunded liabilities since 2011. So dealing with that retention means over time, you won't have those positions that need to be filled. So you don't need to take a look at other ways to do it. Correct the problem, I think is, in looking under the hood as to why they're leaving. I think I have some ideas on that. I know the NEA would, and I fully support finding ways to make this a career choice that that folks can stay with over time. There are incredible pressures on teachers, more so in COVID, but there are pressures before that. And I have such respect because I don't think I could handle those pressures. And I have all the respect for teachers that do.
yeah, and I don't mean to argue with the treasurer, but I do think that this, no matter how many creative recruiting ideas you have in paying for college, if they stay, or any of those things, is not going to address the need that they have right now, which is to fill positions. And the people, and you can entice people to not retire early, but I know that in Guilford, for example, I think they didn't have a third grade teacher, period. All year they haven't had one.
Mhm.
So what they want is they want the ability to have somebody come back in and fill that third grade teaching position. And by enticing the fourth grade teacher to stay longer doesn't help the third grade class, and recruiting somebody to stay in the profession isn't going to do it either. They need immediate relief right now, and I can understand that. So, Colin?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Couple quick thoughts on the conversation so far. One, I'm actually going to be joining your colleagues in Senate Education at 2:30 to talk about the other side of this, which is how do we support folks who are trying to enter the profession? Because ultimately, the health of the pension, to the treasurer's point, is improved when we have a stable workforce and we have folks that are entering the profession and staying in the profession for a long time. But we also have an acute problem right now that this bill is trying to contemplate addressing. I will just going back to the contribution point real quickly, as a general matter, whether if a position is vacant, no teacher is paying into the pension system, and that is not good for the system. So I think as this bill moves forward, a construct that includes a payment from a person in a teaching position paying into the system is going to benefit the system. Obviously, it would be great to have that filled with a new teacher who has a 30+ year career ahead of her. The reality is we have this acute conversation that we're having, or acute challenge we're talking about right now. Two other things I just sort of wanted to say is kind of a general matter to the questions that have been posed previously. I think some sort of potential sunset on this would be reasonable. I don't have a specific suggestion on that. I think it was Senator Clarkson, you were speaking to kind of how many times folks could do this. I don't think into a situation where you have sort of permanent interims for, I know it's a bit contradictory to say, but I think sort of a 1 year, I'm not saying that somebody couldn't do it for more than 1 year perhaps, but 1 year in a single school would, I think, be preferable. I don't think as currently drafted, the bill has any language that would increase a teacher's AFC through this. I believe that is not allowed in the current draft. The one little note that I did also want to flag on healthcare, because as it was pointed out, that hasn't been discussed. And this is, again, perhaps a question for the treasurer or Tim. But I'm curious if there's any reason to contemplate a distinction between Medicare eligible and pre-Medicare eligible teacher retirees as it relates to healthcare, and if that would be a potential break point for purposes being contemplated in this construct.
That's a good, yeah.
Yeah.
Would that make a difference, Tim or Beth?
I think it may. I think right now we still don't, I'm not quite sure where the bill is headed with respect to who the intended provider of healthcare would be. Is it the intention that healthcare is provided by the retirement system or by the new employer? If there's a Medicare eligible retiree who is going back to work, right? The typical practice would be the healthcare provided by the pension system would stop if the individual is going back full time to a teaching position within the system, and then the school would insure that individual. That individual would retain a COBRA option from the retirement system. So theoretically, they could pay full freight. That's not typically done because it's not economical without the subsidy. Now, Medicare has a lot of primary payer and secondary payer rules. So If someone goes back to a position within the system that's eligible for healthcare, I think, but I'm not sure, we've never faced this in the system. I think, I don't know that Medicare would be able to be the primary payer as it is for our retiree insurance at that point. So that is a complicating factor. Again, right now, the bill is silent on how healthcare is to be provided. So, you know, we don't really know the direction to investigate at this point, but that is something that I would think would need further investigation and probably advice of counsel.
So if the school paid for the healthcare, then it wouldn't be part of their retirement benefit at that point until they stopped teaching or stopped that stopgap.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon because our system's we don't have an example to go by where someone's both a beneficiary and an active employee.
Well, but Jim, if somebody is over 65 and they're on Medicare and they come back in to do this teaching for 1 year, that individual contract, I mean, we have a contract with this person, it could say we aren't providing healthcare and therefore Medicare would stay current with that person. They could just carry their Medicare with them, right?
You know, that gets into some of the union bargaining issues that I'm not familiar with, whether or not that's a permissible thing to do, to provide, to say to one position, we're not going to provide you with healthcare.
Well, but this is an extraordinary position. This isn't just a standard position on the full-time payroll. This is a special status. I mean, we've already talked about it being sort of a special status. So it could have its own special contract that could be individualized, and you're dealing with a bunch of retired people. They're going to mostly be on Medicare, right?
But there are complications because haven't the teachers gone now to Medicare Advantage?
Yep.
And in going to Medicare Advantage, there are some rules around when you can sign up for it and when you can change a policy, and if you are allowed to go back to that Medicare Advantage plan once you come off of it. It is much more complicated than it sounds.
The whole space is very complicated, and I would say that the devil's in the details. You know, if there is a special status, you know, we need to know the definition of this special status so that we could follow out, you know, how that would be impacted for the healthcare, for Medicare, for the specific medical insurance we have for both the Medicare eligible and non-Medicare eligible. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it is complicated, and I can't give you a one-liner that says, you know, yes, it's okay, or no, it's not okay.
Yeah. Do we, I can't remember from my notes, and I don't see it easily in my notes, about other states. Has anybody else done this yet? Do we have to invent the wheel on this? Or because this is obvious, such low-hanging fruit with the crisis we're having nationally. Surely there's another state that has gone to this space and figured it out.
Apparently not.
Perhaps. I mean, I think Treasurer Pierce has talked about other states that have had specific critical shortage positions. Again, I would have to look at the details. I don't have a working knowledge of those states.
Well, maybe we could find out. Oh, Becky's gone off the call. All right, I don't see Becky anyway. It would be great to find out through NCSL or through all your teacher organizations. You have more teacher organizations than any other. I mean, you've got masses of associations. Surely we could find out if somebody else is working on this, because yeah, I mean, we can't be the first crowd dealing with this.
Senator, we cited a study in our materials that talked about different states and what they're doing. Now that's a little dated, but maybe we can go back to the folks that did the study, Tim, or take a look at getting some updated data on that.
Is it in your supplements? Is it in
a letter that came from them?
Yeah, it's in our initial letter.
It's in the initial one?
Yes,
Okay.
it is. And there's a very long quote that came out of that that publication. And this was from NASRA. And we can certainly go back and have a conversation.
Right.
So it seems to me that the big issue here is how it's going to impact the pension fund. Can they come back full-time and either not pay into the pension plan and not receive it? Would that violate the negotiated contract? If a third grade position is part of the contract, then, or part of the union, could they come back and not? Is that something that the unions would allow for a period of time, for 2 years or a year or whatever? And then, or could the school district pay in? And then we also have to figure out if they're receiving their full pension, are they also then receiving the OPEB benefits, the healthcare from the plan? And I don't know if that's an issue, because they'd be receiving those if they got a job at Walmart, they'd be receiving the healthcare benefits through their retirement. So I don't know why it's any different if they're not, if they're coming back here for a year and getting the salary for a year.
And I think it's the same with the pension. There are specific rules that apply when you're coming back to employment within the system that are different if you're going to employment out of the system. And why those rules, I can't tell you, but they exist. And
well, as you know, rules are meant to be broken.
Yes.
And that's why they're there. That's why we make rules, is so that we can have exceptions to rules. Because if we didn't have rules, then we would have no exceptions, and then everybody could do whatever they wanted to do. So I think we need to figure out how we break that rule in a way that doesn't impact the pension system. So what I would do is ask Tim and Beth and maybe Jeff and Colin, or somebody, Jay and Colin, to try and figure out a way that this can happen without it impacting the pension fund. The other issues, I think, like a sunset and how many years they should be doing it and how many years they should be out, we can make those decisions. But if you can work on something that assures us that it will not have a negative impact. If it had a positive impact, that would be okay, but that it would not have a negative impact on the pension system. Is that something that we can ask? Because I think that this is something that we need to address.
And I think we want to, given workforce is one of the key issues we're trying to address this session.
Well,
and we know what the need is here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not thinking about the general workforce. I'm thinking about this in particular. Schools. So, Colin, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm obviously happy to work with the treasurer's office and Jay or whoever else. I'm assuming Jay would probably be the best on this. I will say, Madam Chair, I don't think there are probably going to be any assurances. I do think that the treasurer's points about the behavioral unknowns of this are true, and I think that obviously the task force dug into some questions around that, and so I don't think that this is 100% knowable as it relates to the impact, and so I just want to go have our charge and go away with a clear understanding that the charge might not be able to be fully realized as you articulated it just then.
Yes.
So I think one key piece of information, which Tim said he would get for us, is how many people currently are taking advantage of this, because that is at least a piece of your answer of how many people will take up this opportunity.
Well, it may be, but if we have a situation like, if we put it, I think the key is to put some kind of a time limit on it.
Yeah.
That both before you can come back and how long you can come back, and how many people are doing it now. We haven't been in a crisis situation for some time, so I think that's a little bit different. I mean, Jeff, did you have a final parting shot here?
I mean, I just wanted to, number one, thank you. Two, I think it needs to be regarded as an emergency program. Thus,
Yeah.
The focus that you mentioned both at the beginning of this session, at the end, which is a sunset, a limitation on eligibility. And I would say, I fully appreciate the notion of costs to everything, but there are also benefits oftentimes that come with a cost. And what we're trying to address right now is a worker shortage that we want to augment with people who can responsibly return from the ranks of retirees to support the education of our children and not have a liability for the pension fund. So I would be happy to join with the treasurer, Tim, Colin, Jay. I've not worked on this myself to this point, but I would like to moving forward and will.
Okay, that would be great, because I think that we would like to do this, but we want to make sure, especially since we just went through 8 months of trying to figure out the health of the pension system. We don't want to start screwing around with it now. So, so if you can do that, that would be great. And we'll schedule this for sometime next week to hopefully wrap it up, and we'll make decisions about whether it's 6 months or a year. 6 months would actually be 18 months because of the way usually because of the way contracts are signed.
Right.
And how many times it could do it.
Right.
Whether it's in the same school or a different school, and the healthcare. And we can make those decisions, I think.
And does it need to be the full pension or half pension?
Well,
Be creative.
they can already get their half pension.
Nobody is creative.
Okay. Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would be happy to help with this, as with Tim. I'm not sure you're gonna be able to find an answer in a week. That's all. I just want to caution you on that. I think that we're more than willing to help, but and be part of this discussion. I'm just not sure that's doable, and I just wanted to point that out. Getting back to Colin's point, we may not be able to come up with just a sure this is all, all things are covered on this. I think we can make our best efforts. But I wanted to be clear that, if you say, come back in a week and it'll all be solved, I'm not sure we can do that. And I just wanted to be clear.
No, I understand that. And I know that we're going to have to make some decisions if there isn't total agreement, but I think that, and the change in behavior is something that we can't predict. But I think if there was a sunset on this so that it wasn't just an open-ended thing and people could do it at any time, there's less likelihood of change of behavior if it only is available for you to do for 2 years or 1 year, as Colin pointed out. So I think that that's not going to change probably too much behavior as if it was an open, which this seems to be. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're going to jump now to Burlington charter changes.
Good luck. Thank you all.
We'll be happy to leave you. So thank you very much.
Well, you can stay if you want.
No, thank you. Thanks.
So it's incredible that the House didn't break that 6.
I was just gonna say,
Do we have, oh yes, we do have people there. Let me get my schedule out here. And Tucker, would you like to present to us? And just for your information, so that nobody freaks out here in the listening world.
Are we back on it?
Washington County is yellow. Now it is not red, so we are not required to wear masks in committee. It is an option. It's a personal decision. whether you want to wear masks or not. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, but I'm just saying that because we've had criticism from people in the watching world that we haven't been wearing masks. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that. So Tucker, would you like to go look at this and remind us what the original charter said, and then what the House changed, and then what we're proposing might be a change to the House change. Whoa.
Yeah.
If
that's a lot of
anybody,
changes.
I saw Tucker rolling his eyes trying to follow me, but yeah.
Further proposal
But
amendments or
Sarah's
further
here.
proposal.
I'm glad Sarah's here.
Okay.
For the
Yes.
record, Tucker Anderson, Office of Legislative Counsel. As introduced in H 448 originally, the city of Burlington proposed specifically within the probationary period subdivision of the bill, which I believe is what you want to discuss, Madam Chair, that the city would provide for, quote, a reasonable probationary period. And bringing you all back, probationary period would be built into the leases. And within that probationary period, the just cause eviction ordinance would not apply to the agreement between the parties.
So if I rent in April for 1 year, according to this, for 1 year, that probationary period, I could be evicted for any reason.
Violating the term of the lease for the
Yeah.
expiration of the lease.
Yeah, whatever it was.
The just cause
And then
ordinance then.
next April, my probation is over, and then I could only be evicted for just cause.
Yes, and you jumped to what the House did, which was the next step. House Government Operations amended that particular provision to provide that the probationary period adopted in the ordinance would be 1 year. That 1 year probational period was taken from the California just cause eviction statutes. Was proposed in committee, passed out. You have in front of you.
Can I just ask you a question? Did they do that because they thought that maybe the city council couldn't figure out what reasonable meant?
I can't comment, but it was part of a package of amendments that the committee brought forward. It leaned more on the side of landlord protections under the ordinance.
Okay.
So it was built in, again, with some of the other changes around, for example, a limitation on the amount that would be allocated for relocation expenses, things like that.
And I thought we heard in testimony here, that people would be comfortable with up to 1 year. Well, right.
That's the next step. You're all so much faster than I am. Sorry for being so lugubrious and laconic. The amendment that you have in front of you from the committee would now change that probationary period again to state that that probationary period would be less than or equal to 1 year after initial occupancy. So it would allow the city council under the ordinance to adopt up to.
No, this is yesterday's amendment. You have one that's dated today, correct?
I have it, sorry.
The one that has the highlight on it?
It's dated
4-4.
4/4. They're exactly the same.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you changed it today.
No, it's 4/4. It's dated 4/4.
Okay, that was yesterday.
Yes.
So the calculation here is the less than or equal to mathematic sign, 1 year being the standard. The other way that we phrase this, particularly in the unambiguous areas of the criminal statutes, is to say not more than, right? So that if it's 1 year and 1 zeptosecond, all the way through infinity, that is not included here. It is 1 year or less.
So
During which time they have to have cause.
Anthony, did you have?
I just want to understand what we're talking about, not to sound dumb about it, but so up to a year, they would have to have cause if they were going to try to evict you.
No,
other way around.
That's why I asked the question.
up to a year, you don't. It's a probation, you're on probation for a year. the tenant is on probation for a year.
Or less.
Or after 6 months, I could have this person move out.
If they set the probationary period at 6 months,
Right.
then it first on day 5 months and 29 days, they could kick you out. But on 6 months and
Without
1
just-
day, they
Without
would-
just cause.
right, and then right. And then at 6 months and 1 day, they would have to have just cause. It's a probationary period. And that was voted on by the, except they didn't, they said a reasonable amount of time in the, when they voted on it. So why don't we just go back to a reasonable amount of time,
Exactly.
which is exactly what the voters voted on.
To be consistent with the rest of our votes this year.
You certainly could.
And assume that the city council can figure out what reasonable means working with the tenants and the landlords.
Because they're gonna do the ordinance on this.
Yeah.
They're gonna create whatever language they want. Right, Tom?
I would say the House has some good ideas in terms of creating stronger parameters around charter change, and I feel like we should. It's good to acknowledge that the House is trying to create guardrails, and maybe not in the right room to say this.
No, you're not. We honestly don't care what the House ever does.
Then either returning to the same or this, I would be very happy with. I think it amounts to the same thing, but yes.
My only reason for wondering about that is that if we're going to change it at all, should we go back to the original language that the voters voted on?
I agree. Why not?
And that's what we've done in the
We have a
other
city-
charters.
Yeah, we have a city councilor
Yeah,
here.
well,
Maybe it would be interesting.
We
to-
have, yes,
It would be good to ask the city council.
yeah, we will. I just want to know what the committee is.
I would be happy with Tucker's amendment or I would be happy going back to the original.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go in a little bit of an orderly manner here.
You leaving us?
Dan?
Somewhere.
Dan isn't here.
Sarah, we haven't heard from yet.
So, yes, we have a number of times.
Oh, I thought she could be my favorite.
Zariah, are you with us today?
No.
Nope. Eric Hoekstra?
Yep.
You're here. Would you like, I'm going through the list as they're on the agenda so that I don't jump around. Eric, would you like to weigh in on this?
No, I'll defer any time to Angela Zykowski.
Oh, okay. And Larry Miller is, yes, are you,
There.
do you want to weigh in, or are you also gonna?
I should also let Angela speak, but I do think a probationary period of at least a year makes a lot of sense. Anything less than that is, it's just too short to even know a person. We don't know in any kind of relationship. A year is a very short period of time to get to know someone. And that goes both ways, landlord and tenant. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Got it. Sarah, you're next on the list.
Hi, thanks. I would like to see us remain with reasonable. In my research, and I admit it's not always thorough, California and Oregon have a year, but most of the other states, including New Jersey, we looked at, and a lot of municipalities have no probationary period, and have been able to manage their ordinances just fine. So I think the problem with a specific 1 year is that's what it is, because it's in the charter change. So it gives you no latitude at all until we go back to the voters to change it.
Okay, thank you. Angela?
Good afternoon. Thank you, members of the committee. I'm happy to talk more broadly or weigh in on just this particular issue. Having not gotten to testify before this committee before, I was hoping to maybe speak a little bit more broadly about this charter change, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. My name is Angela Zakowski, and I'm the director of the Vermont Landlords Association. I'm also a practicing attorney, and I represent landlords around the state of Vermont, primarily in eviction cases and eviction matters. I have testified before generally the housing related committees in both the House and Senate on lots of other housing bills. And I've tried to spend the last decade or so that I've been doing this work down in the legislature with working collaboratively with advocates, working to bridge gaps, working to try to find balance in our laws and our legislation, and finding those paths through housing policy that is sort of a give and take and is going to work for both sides, while still advocating for the landlord community, because that is what I'm here to do. And do I always agree with the tenant advocates? No. But generally we can find a path through. This particular charter change and this bill related to just cause represents such a significant departure from our current state law and our current existing system that will take this system out of balance. I've been hearing a lot of use of the phrase kick tenants out. Landlords don't actually kick tenants out. They follow a process which has been prescribed to them by the legislature and by the court system. It starts with providing the tenant with a termination notice. And if we're speaking specifically about a no cause notice, the length of that notice has to be between 30 days and 120 days. And it depends on how long the tenants live there, whether or not there's a written lease between the parties, and there's sort of a matrix, so it can range. That's step one. So landlord provides tenant with that notice. If tenant doesn't vacate upon receiving that notice, landlord, in order to enforce that notice, has to file an ejectment action with the court. So they go to court to have their notice enforced, where they follow civil process. And that process can take anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to 12 months. So this is a lengthy process that even with a no cause notice currently, the landlord has to follow. And if at the end of that process, the court finds that the landlord has complied with all of the requirements with length of time, type of notice, proof that the tenant received it, then the court issues the paperwork instructing the sheriff to return the unit to the landlord. So this is a long process, even when it is a no cause notice. This is not something that happens quickly in Vermont, and there are many steps along the way that a landlord has to follow in order to seek removal of a tenant from a unit. Now, do some tenants go voluntarily when they receive that notice? They do, but that's also part of the process. So this sense of, just kicking people out or moving people out on the street, or that there isn't a process that landlords are following. I just want to make sure that we all understand what landlords are facing when they are doing this. It's the same process and same rules for non-payment of rent evictions, for breach of lease evictions. It is all the same, and all paths lead to the courthouse if a tenant doesn't vacate. So getting back to this specific charter change, this will be a complete and utter deviation from our state process. The state has been moving more towards a statewide housing policy, statewide housing changes. There's currently a bill moving its way through the legislature, S210, that's advancing the creation of a statewide housing registry and inspection program. So the focus has been on creating a unified system, a predictable statewide system. And now Burlington is proposing to sort of carve that out and have their own process and their own way of doing these types of cases. You know, this charter change was generated on the premises that landlords evict tenants who are paying the rent and following the lease, that landlords use no cause as a pretext to discriminate against tenants, and that somehow creating this structure, this removing this type of notice from the landlords will alleviate our housing inventory and cost issue in Burlington. Landlords evict tenants who are creating problems in their buildings and in their neighborhoods. They evict tenants who aren't paying the rent. They evict tenants who aren't being good neighbors. They evict tenants who are causing damage to the building. And they use no cause notices in many of these situations, so they don't have to rely on neighbors and other tenants to provide testimony and evidence in court cases. The no cause process is inherently a pro-tenant and tenant protection process. And I know a lot of people have a really hard reaction when I say that, but what it does is it protects other tenants, those good tenants in the building who are living next to those not so good neighbors, from having to become involved in this process, because the landlord doesn't need to rely on their testimony. Just cause, many of the categories in just cause, the landlord will have to use other people, neighbors, other tenants, in order to be able to remove a problem tenant from their building. We saw this actually through the moratorium, when there was a prohibition on evictions in Vermont for pretty much any reason. Even when we had a situation where a tenant was falling into one of the categories where we could ask for an emergency eviction under the moratorium, it was very challenging to get neighboring tenants to become involved in the case. They would call the landlord and complain, these things are happening, tenant has, you know, the neighbor tenant punched me in the face, and you say, okay, great, we'll get the notice out, we need you to come to court. No, I don't want to get involved. I want you to remove that tenant. With just cause, we wouldn't be able to remove that tenant without the participation of the victim and the person who's making the complaints. So this is why in many instances, the no cause notice becomes a tenant protection type notice, because the landlord does not have to rely on other tenants for assistance.
No, let her finish.
This charter, and the way this is written, if it's approved by the legislature, I think it will create a more adversarial relationship between landlords and tenants. And I've spent a lot of time trying to roll that back, right? This should not be out of the box an adversarial relationship between these parties. Does a relationship break down over time? It can. And we spend a lot of focus on sort of the edges, the problems, the problem landlords, the problem tenants. We have this huge group of landlords and tenants in the middle that are just trying to get along, trying to do the right thing. And this bill focuses on sort of those extremes without balancing and protecting the folks in the middle. Landlords don't always want to drag other tenants into the middle of their eviction processes. You know, there's a number of examples that I can give you. Many times it's related to tenant neighbor issues and neighbor disputes. You know, female tenants who are feeling incredibly uncomfortable by a male neighbor who's bothering them, you know, somewhat stalking them, maybe harassing them. A landlord can use a no cause notice to get rid of that male tenant now. With just cause, they wouldn't be able to, because they're not going to have enough evidence to fit into one of these categories to be able to ask him to leave. So that female tenant has a choice. She continues to live there, or she has to now find housing as the victim in this relationship and this issue. Another piece where I say this is not a tenant protection bill is it will require landlords to describe in detail the behavior and lease violations that are being engaged in by a tenant. Right now, a landlord can send a tenant a no cause notice, It just says, hey, you need to leave. There's no record that there's any sort of behavior or other issues happening. If that case gets filed, it gets filed as a no cause notice. Again, there's not a long litany of any sort of issues or problems. But with just cause, the landlord's going to have to lay out and describe that behavior in detail. And they'll have to do the same thing when we get to a court case. And then anyone can go see those court records or can see that these are the issues that this tenant has had at this property with this landlord. And that in and of itself can also make it very challenging for that tenant to now find housing in the future. And tenants who can't find housing are at risk for homelessness, increase the burden on the emergency housing system. And now there's sort of a sense of, oh, you got a no cause notice, your landlord just asked you to leave. And many landlords will look past that if it comes up in a reference check. But now if I have a just cause notice that has laid out the various reasons why my landlord's asking me to leave, it's right there. And I can't run from it and I can't avoid it. And maybe that was the intended goal of this bill, but it doesn't seem very tenant friendly in my mind. Just cause evictions seem to protect tenants who are not following the rules and who are engaged in inappropriate behavior, because it will make it harder for the landlord to remove that person from the building. This bill is not balanced, and this charter is not balanced. I believe it will further exacerbate our housing issues and housing crisis in Burlington, and I would urge the committee to not vote in favor of this charter change. Thank you.
Thank you. Keisha, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so thanks, Angela. I mean, the first I heard about the idea, I think it was late last week, where we talked about the idea that if someone punches somebody in the face or commits some kind of assault or major, criminal act against somebody else in the building, a no cause eviction is the better way to go. I'm really curious about the attitude. If that happens, let's say within the first 6 months of a year-long lease, I mean, that's a long time for someone to be in a building with somebody who has physically harmed them. I certainly would never, as a landlord, want to put someone in that position for that long. And granted, it may require someone's testimony. We have not heard enough about the eviction process for me to know that it's absolutely true that the entire case would be contingent upon that person's testimony in what I believe to be superior court and not criminal court. So
civil court,
yeah. So right. I mean, so there's that piece. I do think the stakes are higher for a tenant, as you said, and it's helpful if whether it's their landlord or someone else that they might be getting help from lets them know, if you fight this in court, it may be an even bigger mark on your record because they will find cause. I haven't heard the advocates, speak to that being any part of the intent, but I think, that is something that a tenant would have to weigh if they truly committed bad acts, that if they feel that their record is worthy of a day in court, that's what the process is for. So I guess I'm just really curious what I feel like is an emerging attitude that it's better to wait and non-renew with somebody who might have committed deep harm to somebody early in their lease.
So I think, I'm happy to address that. And I think I was trying to provide an example of something that I had seen during the moratorium when we could not evict except for very few sort of very emergency type categories. I would say if a landlord came to me and said, this is an incident that happened, we're at month 6 in our lease, we would be sending a breach of lease notice and encouraging the landlord to start that notice and not wait for a no cause notice with certain types of violations. I think violence is definitely one of them, but there are many sort of lower infractions. So it's all of the things that maybe wouldn't have risen to the level of the emergency categories in the moratorium that we're talking about. Really, it's the lesser breaches of lease, the things that wouldn't be sort of tenant to tenant violence, but maybe it is that sort of somewhat stalking situation by one tenant to another tenant, or some damage to the property, or just being really not respectful to their neighbors or to the landlord or to maintenance staff if they're trying to come in to do inspections or make repairs, those types of things. So it is a balance, and I don't think that it's an encouragement for saying, oh, landlord, just wait till the end of your lease if it's something very serious and particularly violence from tenant to tenant. As a practitioner, so as a lawyer who goes to court for evictions, any case that involves tenant behavior is going to require proof of that behavior. And you need direct proof of that behavior. So unless the landlord was there and witnessed whatever the issue is that's being complained about, they're most likely not going to be able to testify. They're going to have to get that proof from whoever's making the complaints to them. Generally, that's the neighbors and people who live at the building. And so it will require the involvement of those other tenants if it's that type of behavior that's happening at the building. They will have to be involved.
Unless you had a security system in a common area. I mean, if let's say it was, something that both people had a different story about something that happened in one person's apartment, that's going to be different. That's treated differently in court anyway, but many landlords have short circuit video of their common areas.
Some of them do. I think the larger complexes, it's a little bit more prevalent, but many of our mom and pop, smaller landlords, duplex, triplexes, single family homes, they don't have that kind of setup or system at their properties. It comes from, their information comes from either they've seen it themselves or a third party is reporting it to them. And if it's a third party reporting it to them about the behavior, that person's going to inherently have to be involved in this process under a just cause.
And I guess if I could, I would say, everybody does deserve fair representation in court or proof of some allegation. I mean, I talk a lot with Black tenants who say, when my kids go outside to play, my neighbors call the police. They have said that to me when they go to pick a flower and the neighbors call the police. So, what you are raising still feels incredibly subjective about when a landlord should side with one person and say that person's worthy of losing their housing because of what another tenant said. I mean, certainly I don't want anyone to be harassed or punched in the face or anything of that sort, but the further down you get to, this person is disrespectful, this person has harassed me, this person makes me feel unsafe in the building, you get incredibly subjective. And that's where we discover that, moms and people of color are often the ones who face no cause evictions.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I kind of look at this as somewhat similar to if you have people working for you, and if you want to get rid of somebody who isn't working out or is misbehaving, you better have something in your files to be able to show. And it does. And I work for a housing group, and every single complaint that comes in about people goes into the files, because you have to have that there in order to and then most people don't want to be evicted anyway. They'll leave right before that, because if they are evicted, then they often can't find, because that goes on their record that they've been evicted, as opposed to, yeah, I got to the final stage here and then I just left before it got to court. But any other questions thank you, Angela. And could I ask you specifically about that section about the probationary period? because it was in the charter a reasonable period, and then the House changed it to a year, and then we're proposing to change it perhaps to that is less than or equal to 1 year.
Which is the same as up to 1 year.
Up to 1 year. And Larry Miller said you need at least a year to.
I would agree at least a year, and have some, I mean, again, that would bring some balance to the bill and some bookends. I think the amendment that's being discussed is more troublesome than sort of the other two versions, at least from sort of the landlord side. So both the reasonable standard and the 1 year probationary time limit.
I would assume that this is just what has to be considered in there. If it said reasonable, then that would be something that the city council would hash out with there. And I know there are probably both tenants and landlords on the city council.
It would appear.
I mean, we know there are landlords on the city council, and my guess is that everybody on the city council isn't a homeowner. There might be some renters.
One tenant.
Just one tenant? So.
But they're housing advocates.
Oh, yes, but, so, okay, thank you. That was, anybody else want to weigh in on that, just that section? I think we know from both perspectives here what the pros and cons are of this in general, of the charter change and of the issues involved in it. But Erica, did you want to weigh in on this amendment, this possible amendment? You're on mute.
Sorry, my mouse is going haywire, so I couldn't unmute, but I'm working around it. Yeah, really quickly, just wanted to weigh in on behalf of my VLA colleagues that both the reasonable language and the up to 1 year language would be supported by VLA.
Okay, so where are we, committee? First of all, let's decide on the proposed amendment and whether we should accept the original language that was voted on by which said reasonable, and assume that the city council has some sense about what reasonableness means, and they might go beyond a year. I mean, because we're not telling them here that so they might go beyond that. Or if we want to stick with a year as the House, or if we want to say not more than a year.
I think the city council should have the flexibility to make a decision, but
I'm happy to go with reasonable. I mean, with the original language. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
I was gonna go with this.
So that, not less, no,
Or,
not more than a year.
Basically.
So they could set it at 2 months if
Correct.
we said this,
Which doesn't quite.
sound reasonable.
Yeah, I think that's a little unreasonable.
Keisha?
I mean, I'm inclined to go with Councilor Carpenter's request that we go back to the original language. But I am interested in Brian's.
well, I thought that he actually said he would prefer, I'll just call it Tucker's amendment. Somebody did.
Larry said he was okay with it.
He said that I think that he would like at least a year. What Larry said, because he said it takes a long time to get for a tenant, and I personally, I would like for the city council to hash it out and figure out what's reasonable, and they might come up with a longer period than a year.
Yeah.
Or they might come up with a shorter period. but that would be for them to work out with their landlords and their housing advocates.
Well, it sounds like it's 4-1 for the amendment, so I will go on with the committee on the amendment.
So we will go back to reasonable.
To the original
That's a
language.
reasonable decision.
Thank you. I think you all know where I'll be.
I know, we know that.
And
Okay.
consistent with our actions on other charters.
It is, because we
Sure.
have been, yes. All right, so does somebody want to move that Tucker's gonna have to create a new draft to go back to reasonable.
And what would that be, Tucker, 1.2?
Or 2.1? I never know how they do it. It's like magic.
Make it 1.2.
Okay. And that would, do you have a notion of how that might read? Just go back to the original language of reasonable.
It would read, provide for a reasonable probationary period after initial occupancy. I
would
believe
move-
I'm going to check H448 to make sure that is the entirety of that.
Oh, the original 448, not the 448 we passed.
Because that's what we're asking for, is to go back to the original.
Yeah.
Bill is introduced, which is the language that was passed by the voters.
Yeah.
So when you have that, I would move it.
Okay. And I will say while we're waiting that it is hard to get rid of a bad tenant.
Already.
It is hard, yeah. We have friends that bought a house and they couldn't move in for over a year because they couldn't get rid of the people that were living there.
And yeah, all of us during the course of this pandemic have had landlords who were stuck with bad tenants. They were in the process of trying to encourage to move on, and then couldn't evict them, and that was really a challenge.
And it is even outside of the pandemic.
Yeah. I'll just say I didn't realize, to Angela's testimony, that there was that kind of two-step process. I've never been involved in either being a landlord, well, I was a tenant, but it was 45, 50 years ago. And I didn't have any issues, and neither did a landlord with me, so it never came to that. But I didn't realize that it could take over a year.
Yeah.
Oh.
As it currently exists, even with the help of the court.
And then one of the problems is that if you get a really bad tenant and you send them the termination notice, then they often stop paying their rent too. So, but it is a problem. We have an apartment in our house, but we don't even have a lease or a contract or anything. And our tenant keeps raising her rent.
I hope on a more annual basis for a tenant.
No, sometimes she just says, you're charging way too little. And I say, I know, but I want you here. And so she says, it's time for me to raise your rent.
I want you as a landlord because my landlord just raised my rent 10%.
Oh, she raises hers. She's raised it 3 times since she's been there.
How long has she been there?
7 years.
So I'm gonna buy my landlord's apartment from him, and then you can just be my landlord and keep my rent the same. That'd be good.
So do we not have any rules about how much you can raise rent in 1 year?
Not statewide, no. We don't have a rent control measure.
Do you have something in Burlington?
No, there is a provision in this bill, but that's only to stop de facto evictions from through unreasonable rent increases. So, but nothing in Burlington.
What is a reasonable rent increase?
What's reasonable probationary period? It's
right.
Same question against the city council.
And so much depends on if you have been charging a certain rent, you've been keeping it relatively low, and then you get a reappraisal, and suddenly your property tax is double. You have to pay for those increased property taxes somehow. So you raise the rent because, and presumably then the renters would get the renter's rebate because.
Or if heat's included in your rent, all of a sudden the heating bill goes up?
Yeah, we include everything in our rent except the phone. And one year, about 10 years ago with another tenant, we did put on a surcharge just for the months of January and February, because the heat went so far out of whack.
So you get like a landline phone?
If they want it.
Excuse me, I have a landline.
Well, I do too, but I just find it curious, someone that didn't have one, like I've had mine my whole life.
Yeah, I have.
Why would you all of a sudden like want one if you?
Oh, no, there's a landline
okay,
in the apartment, and
Kinda
we don't
like
pay for her phone.
trying
We
to get
pay
a
for
Model T
electricity and
car.
water and
Okay.
all of that, yeah.
We have.
And you might
So-
want to have a landline because it doesn't go out when I read it.
True.
No, unless it's connected to your internet.
Yeah, that's the problem.
But so
Madam Chair, we're due to take a break before the burn pit people come in. So do you want to postpone the vote until after the break?
So we can get.
We have the amendment.
Would we have the amendment from Tucker?
We have it.
Oh, we have it, it's here.
Oh,
On
okay,
our-
sorry.
Okay.
I would,
I
is it
think
1.2?
let's just vote.
Yes, it's 1.2.
Okay, I would move that we amend H 708 with draft 1.2
Okay.
Okay.
at 3:01 PM.
Okay. You have moved.
Senator Clarkson,
Yes.
Senator Colmore.
Yes.
Oh, this is for the amendment.
This is for the amendment.
Okay. Senator Flynn.
That's.
I was coming down a little thread.
That's how you know it was.
Yeah, right? It's like, wait.
I'm paying attention.
I know, I'm listening to you.
You said yes, Senator.
Okay.
Senator Rosenfield, yes. Senator White.
Yes.
Okay, and the amendment passes.
Now, do I have a motion to?
I would move the H 708 as amended.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Colmore.
No.
Senator Fleenan.
Yes.
Myself, Senator Rosenstiel, yes. Senator White.
Yes.
410.
And this being a Burlington issue, would you like to, if you don't
We're
want
gonna have
to.
plenty of this. I am fine doing it.
Okay, great. Because I think we have one more Burlington.
And she's not only the Burlington senator for Chittenden County, but she also serves on Senate Economic Development, Housing. and
Okay, all right, okay. We're gonna take a 10-minute break. Be back here at 3:15. We're going to have.
Thank you, Tucker.
Thank you, Tucker.
Thanks, Tucker.
Thank you, everybody out there for being with us on this. And sorry, we were kind of ignoring you for a while there. But we needed to have the committee discussion, and so thank you for all the input.